we have already talked about, we're on that medication cycle, aren't we? And the first thing we talked about was making observations. And that's when we talked about subjective and objective observations, and objective are the best things to report. I know that that's you'll still have some of your subjectivity to it, but remember that you can put in what they say, and that tells us a lot of information. Okay, then we went to the doctor, didn't we? And then we went to the pharmacy. And we talked about the pharmacy, the label, being sure that that medication is correct. Okay, we're now at the point, and then we administered. We administered, and we did it differently if they can do it somewhat themselves, because they need to do what they can do, or if you have to do it all. Any questions about anything that came up last week with some of that? Okay, and so today, number 7 is talking about documenting. That is the next step. There's some general rules of documentation that we're going to go over, and we're going to talk about those, and we're going to talk about what a stop order is. What does a stop order sound like to you? That's when they're not going to take it anymore. Now, we have always said things like, and this is a stop order that is a regular stop order. You have this for your medicines. It'll say, take it for 10 days. That means to stop then, doesn't it, after 10 days? But on our residents, it used to say, take it every evening. Didn't say for how long, did it? And so we've now had some regulations that say we need to know what the doctor's actually thinking. And so we have now had to ask our physicians, how long do you think that's going to be? And we have some things like indefinitely. Because if they have seizures and they are taking seizure medicines, they're not ever going to not take seizure medicines. They're going to be on seizure medicines. If they have behaviors and that medicine has helped them be able to live more socially in society, then they are going to be on that medicine. Now, it is a possibility it will change, but at this point, the physician is able to say, this medication, and you take it take it indefinitely. So that is our stop order. If there's regular 3-month orders do not have a stop order on it, you may want to say, are we supposed to have a stop order? Because in our class, she talked about stop orders, and you can even show it to them in the book. You can bring this up in clinical, because one of the things is that supported independent living has been moving towards this for several years now. Community homes were doing it, and so it may be that it hasn't really gotten there in the supported independent living group. Or they may have an answer that's better. Yes? We used to do drug holidays, and that's a good question that you're asking. And a drug holiday meant that we took them off of it to see how they were without it. We're not doing drug holidays anymore. Are you happy with that?
Yeah.
Because if you've been around when we did drug holidays, that could be a real issue, couldn't it? We actually, and in many ways, the whole point was for the individual to be sure that they weren't taking something they didn't need. And we did reduce it before we took them off, so we did. And it might have been that we did find that a certain reduction might have been okay. However, with behavior drugs, with mood-altering drugs, it takes about a week or 2 to get them out of their system. So sometimes that slowdown wasn't totally what it would be like if it was that way forever. But anyway, we did have a lot of issues, and it made them feel bad. The resident felt bad not being on their medicine. They feel a lot better with their medicines. So no, we don't have drug holidays anymore that I'm aware of. I have not seen them in many years. That's a good question, though. Any other questions? Okay. And then we need to talk about this, what observations are important to document. I think you kind of know that anyway. let's go over this. This is the next thing in your, it's on page 90, and it just goes over all of these things, general rules and then rules for charting. We'll start with legibility. What you chart, what you record should be able to be read. If you can't write really well, then you print. Make it be where you can read. The only person that cannot be legible is the physician. And that's not true either. They have to make it legible also. But I think you think that doctors don't. But when you read their writing, I'll tell you who's really bad, and the ones I see are the podiatrists. Yeah, try to read, and it's because the words are things I'm not familiar with too. And that's what's hard too with you reading the physicians. If you're not familiar with the words, if you didn't go on that visit, because on that visit the doctor said what he was writing pretty much. And then you can read it because you kind of know what he was saying. But legibility is real important. So write or print so that someone can read what it is you've written. Use durable ink. Durable ink means something that cannot be erased or will fade away. Now, what color ink are y'all supposed to use? Black. And that started many years ago when Xerox machines really only copied black well. And so it just became a rule. In medical records, we all use black. Nowadays, it'll copy any color. It's just the same as black. But we've hung on to that black. And so that's become a policy, and that's fine. And that's the same everywhere. The only thing that I've ever seen much different is sometimes different shifts record on different colors. But I haven't seen that around here. So if your facility says black, that's a policy and you need to do that. Never erase, you know that, don't you? It should be able to be erased anyway, and besides that, you never obstruct what it was you wrote. Now, I have done it myself where I have written on the wrong record. There's nothing I can do but scratch through it with one line, say void or error. I kind of like void, sounds better than error, doesn't it? Say void or error and put your initials. And somewhere in there, your initials need to be identified. And it usually is somewhere on the record. So if you make a mistake, and it's terrible when you've written a whole bunch and you realize that you have written on the wrong record. But you have to do it. Now, if it's the only page, you know, that's different. You started a new page, you can just start over on another new page in the right place. But if it's a continuation, there's nothing you can do. Someone wrote before you. And so you have got to just put the lines through and say void or error and put your initials. Do not try to obliterate it. It should be readable. Even though it's not the right record, it still should be readable. They do not want you trying to change something and nobody can see what you wrote in the first place. That's the point of that. Chart and time sequence. Now, when you go into wherever it is you're working, you usually do some kind of log during that shift, don't you? Okay. There may not be a whole lot going on. So it may be that it may be a couple hours. Possibly it's a good thing to write something when you first go. How are things going? What are they saying? But then in a couple hours you ought to write something again, unless there's really nothing to say. The reason for that is if anything occurs, it should be written in a timely fashion. And it's hard to remember at the end of the day exactly what time that was. So you try to keep up with what's going on, especially if there's an occurrence. You chart it in the time that it occurred. Be accurate and concise. You don't have to go around and round of what went on, but just be accurate and do it as concisely as possible. If you're going to use medical terminology, which I would say don't even try to use. We are no longer supposed to be using medical terminology in medical field. They have said that it's too confusing. There's several things that mean a similar thing, and it's only correct in the context of that sentence. Well, that still could be confusing. So they have now said not to really use medical terminology, but if you do, be sure it's correct. Like if you put Q day, use the Q instead of an every. Like I say, we're not, and because we're getting out of really charting nowadays, we do it all on the computer. That's another thing, we write it out. Chart objectively. You know what that means, don't you? Using that objective terminology, what you see, what you heard. Chart the individual's response or lack of a response to a medication. Now on PRNs, you have a place to do that, don't you? Because you're supposed to record about 30 minutes after a medication that they ask for. But if they're on a medication and there's no response, their behavior is still the same, you can say, make the statement of what you see. And so somebody knows that there is no response, or maybe the response is dizziness, that they state they are dizzy. Their balance appears, you're seeing that they have a loss of balance. Okay, and you need to sign with your complete name. You're going to be able to put MT after that. You're a med tech after you complete this. And so that indicates that you've had some training. So use your complete name. Now there are times within that chart that you don't have to. Yes?
You say, we can sign on that, we gonna put MT instead of our initial?
No. After your initials.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we still need your initials. But you do use your complete name when you write something, unless on that same page is a place where you've signed your name and put initials. For instance, on the MAR, there's a place for you to sign and put your initials, and so you can put initials then in there, and you don't have to put MT there. But at some point you can, and I'm saying that, and I actually probably don't know that, but I'm saying that you have had training, and therefore we can call the CMAs can write CMA behind their names. Now med tech can stand for something else, so we may have to come up with another MT. But in this facility, it stands for something. And, it's the same thing as they can have initials that stand for the same, similar things in different places. Okay. And I have that on a recording now, so we'll have to clarify that. Here's some more rules for documenting, and this is specifically for medications. And it is here on page 91. Chart as soon as the medication is administered. That's not any news to you, is it? This is your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 6 rights. The medication, the individual, the time, dosage, and route. Every medication must be charted or documented. It's on page 91. And probably moves over to 92. Must have a response to those PRNs. That's one of our charting errors. When they tell you what are the major errors in errors, it is going to be with documentation, and it may be with not saying what the response is, because that's a requirement. And so if you don't put a response, now you're leaving and someone is coming on after you, and the resident about 10 minutes till says, I have a headache and I want a Tylenol, and you let them get that and it's recorded. Now you're not going to be there in 30 minutes, so that has to be communicated. Someone needs to respond to that in a timely fashion. It can be an hour, it doesn't have to just be 30 minutes, but it has to be long enough that they would have a response. That's the reason for the 30 minutes statement. If they're on their way off to the day hab, then someone there needs to know that they need to find out, how did that work? Do they still have a headache? Chart medication omission according to the policy. Now that means if they are not getting a medicine because they refused it, because they were going for lab, any reason, their behavior was different, change in their behavior, then somewhere on your MAR, it needs to have a way to chart how you're gonna chart it. The only thing I'm gonna tell you is, do not chart it at the time it was supposed to be given. You don't go back at 10 o'clock because they went to the lab and you write down that you charted, and you chart it for 8 o'clock. They'll sign for it and you'll sign for it. I mean, they'll do what you tell them. And so then you'll sign for it. Looks like on that day they got an 8 o'clock med. Well, they didn't. They got it at 10. So you're going to have to chart it in the way, however your supervisor tells you to do that. They may have you write it on the back. Is there a back place to do things that are different? How do you do it? Has anyone ever had to chart a medicine that was omitted at some point for some reason? How is it done? Someone's done it. Nobody here's done it. Okay.
Say that again?
Have you ever had to chart a medicine that was given at a different time than it was supposed to be given? It was omitted for some reason, like they went to the lab. Nobody's had to do that. What if you had to do that? Call your supervisor, ask them how to do it. But hopefully in your clinical, and I'll mention that's something that you need to know. What's the policy on charting a medication that's given at a different time? You say there's a sheet on somewhere.
Put it on a premise number.
You put it on.
Premise notes and put an asterisk so that they can refer back.
Okay, she's saying there's an asterisk.
That's what I do.
That's
like
what
on
she.
my progress notes, like if you were out and they didn't take it, I put it in the progress notes that the 8 o'clock meal was taken at 10, and I put a little asterisk so the person reading my notes can refer back.
Okay, but what does it do on the MAR? Just nothing there?
On mine, but if you wanted it wasn't there.
Okay.
At 8
Let me
o'clock.
tell you, and let me tell you why this is important. And we're not consistent in what we know to do. If I were a surveyor coming in and looking at your records, this has to make sense to me. And I'd be going through the MAR and there'd be a 0, and I'd think, okay, why was that? Do I know to go to the progress note? Not really. Maybe someone working there does, yes.
When my client medicine, when it's discontinued, they draw a line on the days that it's discontinued.
That's discontinued
That's
though.
discontinued, that's different.
That's-
Not to take up to those days.
Right,
And then the medication is removed from the.
right. And that is one time that it is no longer being given. But if it's just omitted, yes. A what? I'm sorry, I don't hear.
We can write a critical report. That's what.
Oh, a critical sheet. I don't know what a critical sheet is.
We write a report.
It's a report. I don't know what that is, but okay, let me tell you what I'm hearing though, is we're not doing it consistently, are we? Because we don't really know exactly what to do. And so what we need to do is find out what the policy is. Okay? There is a policy. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, when I was working in a facility, when we were short, we had nurses, we had to do college, and some like another
Okay. Okay, what she's doing is reporting a policy she used to work under. And yes, ma'am, back there. Okay, but I'm not even talking about a new drug. I'm talking about, okay. She'll do a sheet for that. Okay, so here again, y'all, we're hearing a lot of different responses, which tells me,
When I first started, I made a mistake and didn't write that lid down and gave it to them later. And I wrote it on. They got types of sheets. And one sheet at 308 was like,
okay, we're still in the same little place, aren't we? Where we're not sure exactly Okay, and y'all, it's wonderful to discover something that we're not doing consistently, because that's something to address, isn't it? So if indeed they have a medication that's not given it,
Incident report.
the daily report? Or incident report. It's okay, and an incident is something that is not the same as a usual day. This is an incident. However, we usually don't write that on there. We usually have some place to put it so that it can be seen. However, we need to just find out. That's the answer to the question. That's a question to ask your supervisor. And I will mention it so that when y'all have clinical and you're going over forms, okay,
Omitted medication. What you do is when you omit it, you call your supervisor. The supervisor call the doctor, tell them it's been missed, and could they give it at a certain time. Supervisor call you back and advise you what to do. And
okay.
that's how they do it.
But
The
that's,
way they write it, I guess the supervisor tell you that.
okay, because that is how you omit, yes. You do omit something. Are you supposed to omit their meds before their lab? You have to find out. Some labs you can still give their medicines. But once it's been done, how is it documented? And that's what we're talking about, is documenting it. And the supervisor may tell you that, but there should be some kind of policy. I am sure there is some kind of policy with the VOA that there's a place to record that. So that if I come in as a surveyor, or I come in as another person working, when I see on the MAR that it wasn't given, I know exactly where to go to see if it was, and if it was given at a different time. So can you see the consistency there? Rather than, I wrote it on an incident report, I wrote it on a critical report, I just wrote it in the log. That's not telling somebody exactly what to do, where to go. If they read the notes, it's helpful. But if I was a surveyor, my job would not be to go immediately to notes. So anyway, if it's confusing to us, it's confusing to someone who comes in. Okay, so that was very good discussion on something that I think we need to clarify a little better, don't you? Because we need to be doing it according to a policy, which we don't know what the policy is.
I don't have my list of stuff. Yes, it's up at 5.
Oh,
That's all you need.
okay, I bet you're talking about this? She's talking, this thing right here? Oh, you don't have what of 7? The self-test? You don't have the self-test? Okay.
You know Gabriel.
Okay, I will help you with that in a minute. She's asking for the self-test for 7. It's not there. Okay, we'll get that taken care of during the break. Okay. Now, this is your order. And we're just going to review again, and you recognize all these things, don't you? Because within these things are those right individual, right drug, right route. See, it's saying the name, the medication, the route, how often, which is time, the dosage. This duration is your stop order, isn't it? How long are they supposed to take it? Now, the order should have the doctor's name and this miscellaneous. What's miscellaneous? What do you guess that is?
It's random. Like,
Okay, it's things like, should it be refrigerated? Should you take it with food? Should you not take it with food? Should you take it 30 minutes before you eat? Should you not take it with milk? Those kinds of things that can affect the medication is miscellaneous information. Now, this order may not have this on it, but the pharmacist may add it when you get it on your prescription. Stop orders. That is what we've said already. It is when that medication is to stop. Timekeeper, what time is it?
10 minutes.
Okay.
10 minutes.
Okay, let me skip. I think we're going into, let's just go ahead and finish this.
They trying to beat you out 2 minutes.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Okay. We're going to talk about medication references. This just takes 2 or 3 minutes, so we will be able to then take our break. This is the use of medication references. Now, references aren't as, I won't use the word critical, but you don't tend to have to look things up as much, because when you pick up that medicine from the pharmacy, don't you have the information with you? Right. And so we actually have created what we call a formulary now. Every time you bring a piece of paper in about a medicine, and that then becomes added to the other medicine, that becomes what we call a formulary. We used to, years ago, before we had all this access to information, the pharmacist would have to make a list of medicines used in the home and write down all of that information for you, and it was called a formulary. Now, you get it and you compile it for each individual. We have the information. You have no excuse to not know something about that medicine, because it should be, and where do you store those? In the medication book. That's a good place to store them, because that's a place you would think to look, isn't it? So you look and you'll be able to see if your resident has been put on a new medicine, then your responsibility is to find that piece of paper and read about it. Now that paper is going to tell you what is the usual use of that medicine, because it's spit out of a machine. So if it's a seizure medicine, like Tegretol, but they're using it for behavior control, it's going to say it's a seizure medicine. So you may have to figure out with your staff why they're being put on a seizure medicine when that's not the problem. But what is important is that if a seizure medicine is being given for something else, it is still a seizure medicine, and it behaves like a seizure medicine. And how it behaves is, it's got a certain blood level you need to keep it within to know that it's therapeutic. It has some side effects that are what seizure medicine side effects are, and it tells you that in your literature. But it's real important to know that if it's a seizure medicine, I don't care why it's being ordered, it's still a seizure medicine, and it still has the same side effects, the same lab requirements that it might have. And so it's good to know that it's a seizure medicine. But you need to know why it's being used for your resident, and you need to know what the therapeutic results need to be, and you need to know what kind of side effects you need to observe for. Early on when we started, I asked something and they said, I don't know what it is. It's just a medicine and we give it. That is not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to know what it is, to know if it's really, is it in the right dosage range? If it says 20, and it should be 0.20 on the label, and you read in the literature that the usual dose is 0.20, there's a problem with the label, isn't there? So you look at all those things. This is what you do for yourself as well, don't you? You know what the doctor's prescribed, and you look to see if it's what the doctor actually prescribed. Okay, let's look at some of these. The main thing they talk about in this lesson is the physician's desk reference, the PDR. Have you heard that name before in your life?
No.
Well, y'all are all too young. PDR was the primary lookup for medications over the years. Okay. So, and the PDR is divided into 6 sections. And it's telling you this, and it's really, I'm not going to make a big deal of it. The interesting thing is, look at how it's done. One section is the manufacturer. One section is the brand name. One section is the ingredients, which is really a generic name. And there is a section that's a picture. So you can actually look at the picture. Benadryl is characteristic of half pink, half white. And if you looked up Benadryl, and it would show you the picture of that. Now, we are not pharmacists, so we can't make a determination, this pill that's half pink and white is this pill in the PDR. But it's interesting to see the pictures. So this was for years, was one of our best references. Every home had a PDR, I mean community home, kind of. Maybe the main office had a PDR. So we could look up that information about the drugs that you're now getting from the pharmacist. So this is in here about that PDR. And there's a picture of a PDR. You see how big it is? It's big. Well, it isn't as big as these people. I'm realizing but it's a big book. There's also a smaller one that's for over-the-counter medications. Okay. The other thing is we can check the package brochures. Now, you do that with something over the counter. If you get something over the counter, it has a little brochure in it. Really, a PDR was nothing but a compilation of all those package brochures. You don't get them from the pharmacist because the pharmacist gets a bottle this big and has a package brochure, but he doesn't give that to you. You just get the bottle or the blister packs. These are other ways to look things up. Internet, of course, is a very handy method of looking something up. All you have to do is Google the name and it comes up. And it tells you, if you Google the generic name, it comes up with a bunch of different trade names as well.
Is it all true?
Yes, yes. If it's under, where it's not true is the bloggers, the ones that just say, this is how I, whatever. There's some, and that's under herbs and stuff like that. But if it's under a manufacturer's name, the Tylenol or even the generics, those are true. And the thing about it is you can also say you can say interactions with Tylenol. Just Google that, and what will come up is a way to put your medicines down and see if Tylenol interacts with any of those. Okay.